So our next exercise is going to be doing what's called a flat felled seam. This is a type of seam that's used on the side of jeans. It's where you need to have a lot of sturdiness in the seam allowance, and the fabric may unravel. So the raw edges of the fabric are actually on the inside of the seam. This is actually a nice way to finish a seam as well. So if you're using a lightweight chiffon, you may want to encase your raw edges inside the seam. So in order to make this, we need our J foot, which is our standard foot, and this is our R foot. It's got a blade in the middle, and that's going to help us come down the middle here. Okay, so we're going to put the J foot on. And I have my machine set up at 0-1, so this is the back stitch or the stop stitch, so either 1 or 2. And we're going to sew a seam at 5/8, which is your standard seam allowance for garment sewing. Again, because I'm old school, I always hold my top thread. My 5/8 is right there. Remember, I'm going to always watch along the side here, not my needle. I'm just following here. Go. So just a standard seam. So I'm going to take one seam and I'm going to cut half of it off. So this would actually be the top of my garment. So these are the right sides. So this is the right side, this is the right side, and my seam allowance is actually on the top. Typically your seam allowance is always underneath. So I'm just going to finger press this. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to cut half of this off. You may want to use a ruler and a rotary cutter for this. Just make sure you don't cut your fabric. So now this seam, this is actually going to be wrapped around it. This is why we cut half of it off. And then you put it down here. So now you've encased this raw seam and this raw seam. So this raw seam and this raw seam will be encased. So I'm going to fold that over, do a finger press. So you want this raw edge matching your stitching. And I just keep in mind, I'm just finger pressing this. And then flip it over. We can use a pin just to keep it down. Go. Another pin. And you may want a pin here. Now if you've pressed this down with a little bit of steam, it should stay down. Grab a pin here. Oh. So when I stitch, we're going to be stitching right on the edge here. And this is why our stitch in the ditch foot is. You can see this blade here. It's going to go along that fold. And I'm going to be stitching right in here. And this little bubble here, my needle's going to be right here. This is stitch in a ditch foot. It's used for so many things, especially for quilters who want to stitch in the ditch. That's what this foot is for. And that's going to keep me lined up perfectly along this edge. So let's go ahead and change our foot. Pop the J foot off. Let's put our stitch in the ditch foot on. Try not to get your top thread caught in the foot. So we can see my needle is here. I need to move my needle over. So in order to do that, I need to access my menu, which is right up here. And now I'm going to move my needle over. So where it is right now, it's quite a ways over because the fold is going to be here. I'd like to have my stitching about right here. So let's move it over 1. That's still a bit of ways. 2. Let's do it there. So if I just use my flywheel, looks like, I think that's pretty good. Let's hit OK. Let's get this all set up here. So the fold here is going to be right on the edge of the fold I made. Can I go down a bit more? Okay. So I'm watching here. This blade must be along the fold here. Make sure you take your pins out. Never stitch over your pins. You can do serious damage to your machine. Nice and slow. I'm watching here. I'm not watching my needle. Let's go back here. Take that out. Okay, let's take a look. Look at that. That's a beautiful flat felled seam. So here is my fold, and there's the stitching I just did with the stitch in the ditch foot. Isn't that beautiful? This is a great way of finishing any seam allowance that has a loosely weaved fabric, so you know it's going to unravel. And if you need to add structural integrity to a seam, i.e. jeans, this is a great way of finishing it, because now this is double stitched, right? And it's not going to unravel because the raw edges are inside here.